In October 1923, Emma Schulte stood in front of a Berlin bakery with a wheelbarrow full of Reichsmarks. She wore a canvas apron over her widow's dress, the same apron she had worn for 3 years of morning shifts at a Charlottenburg textile mill. By the time she reached the counter, the price of bread had doubled again. The wheelbarrow was not enough. She had saved 3 years. The money was meant for a small rental apartment near her daughter's family. 6 weeks earlier, it would have been enough. In October 1923, it was not enough for 2 loaves. Emma did everything the German government instructed its citizens to do. She saved in marks, she avoided speculation, she trusted the currency. What happened to her savings was not random, and it was not an accident. It was a transfer, from her to someone else, carried out by the central bank on behalf of a specific group of borrowers. By the end of this video, you will know exactly who kept their wealth in 1923 Weimar and how. You will know the system by name, and you will see why the same system, with different names, operates now. Here is the first thing most people get wrong about Weimar. The hyperinflation was not an accident, it was a system. Every stage had a named official, a documented memo, and a traceable beneficiary. 3 pieces mattered. First, unpayable foreign debt. The London Ultimatum of January 1921 set German reparations at 132 billion gold marks, roughly 3 times what Germany produced in 1913. The debt had to be paid in gold. Germany collected its taxes in paper marks. The Reichsbank, the German central bank, had to bridge the gap. Second, political paralysis. On June 24, 1922, Foreign Minister Walther Rathenau was assassinated in the Grunewald district. 2 machine guns, a passing car. Rathenau had been negotiating with the Allies, the only path that did not require mass printing. The mark dropped 12% within the hour. Foreign lenders received the signal. Germany's political system could not control its own money. Third, a central bank that could print without limit. Reichsbank President Rudolf Havenstein kept the interest rate at 18% a year, while prices rose more than 1,000% a month. By October 1923, it took 4.2 trillion marks to buy 1 United States dollar. In that single month, the Reichsbank printed more marks than had existed in all of Germany in 1914. But printing was not the engine. Printing was the smoke. Now here is how the transfer actually worked. An industrialist walked into a Reichsbank branch. He put factory inventory on the table. Rolls of cloth, tons of coal, crates of machinery. He asked for a loan in marks. The Reichsbank said yes. The interest rate was 18% a year. Here are the numbers. January 1923. The Reichsbank had 23 billion marks in outstanding loans. November 1923, 496 quintillion. Every one of those marks was created at the moment each loan was approved. They did not exist before the loan. They entered the economy the instant the paperwork was signed. Here is what happens next. September 1923. A Ruhr industrialist borrows 500,000 marks. He walks out of the Reichsbank. He walks into a currency exchange in Essen. He hands over 400,000 marks. He receives a stack of Swiss francs. He locks them in a safe. 6 weeks pass. Prices rise 29,500% that month. October arrives. He returns to the Reichsbank. He repays the 500,000 marks plus the 18% interest. But the marks he uses to repay now buy less than a loaf of bread. The loan cost him nothing. The Swiss francs in his safe are still Swiss francs. The Reichsbank absorbed the difference. Now here is what else happened. Every one of the 500,000 marks the Reichsbank created made every mark already in someone else's pocket worth less. The retired postman who held government bonds from 1914, worth less. The factory worker whose pay arrived 2 weeks late, worth less. The widow with savings in the bank, worth less. The industrialist walked out with Swiss francs. The Reichsbank wrote the loan. Emma Schulte and everyone else paid for it without being asked. This was not random printing. It was printing for a specific class of borrower. The system had a name, Credit for the man with coal and steel. Dilution for the man with paper savings. That was the whole mechanism. Emma Schulte was 52. Her husband, a postal worker, had died in 1917 from a stroke in a Charlottenburg sorting office. She had taken a job at a textile mill to top up the pension. For 3 years, she had saved 300 marks a week. The goal was a small rental apartment near her daughter's family in Charlottenburg. A quieter street. 2 rooms. By October 1923, her savings had reached 200 million marks. It was not enough for 2 loaves of bread. Emma had done nothing wrong. She saved, she worked, she trusted the bank. The price board behind the bakery counter read 13 billion marks for 1 loaf. The next morning, it would read 26 billion. Emma was not an unlucky case. She was the pattern. In July 1925, the German government passed the Aufwertungsgesetz, the revaluation law, to decide what savers would get back. Here is the table. People who had lent money against a house held for 5 or more years. 25 cents on every mark of the original loan. People who had bought company bonds, 15 to 25 cents on the mark, paid years later. People who had bought government war bonds, the Kriegsanleihen, which families had bought out of patriotism, 2.5 cents on the mark, paid after reparations. Bank account holders, nothing. Savings bank depositors, almost nothing, under a formula so tangled that lawyers could not explain it. People who lived on fixed income from investments, what Germans at the time called the rentier class, had been 15% of the country in 1913. By 1925, they were 3%. 12% of all Germans had been wiped out in one currency event. And there is a name nobody mentions in the standard Weimar story. Benjamin Strong, the governor of the United States Federal Reserve, explained in 1925 why the German government could not be more generous. Paying savers back would have scared American lenders away. So the savers were not paid back. The American money kept flowing. By November 1923, Emma Schulte moved into her daughter's 2-room flat in Neukölln, a working-class district she had spent 15 years trying to leave. The transfer was legal. It was written down. It was chosen. Now here is what most people miss. The Reichsbank was not confused. It was not overwhelmed. In October 1923, Rudolf Havenstein went to the Reichstag and defended the lending window. He called it essential to keep German factories running. He said it out loud. The central bank must keep giving paper credit to industry, no matter what the inflation does, because stopping would close the factories. This was not an emergency fix. This was the policy. The Reichsbank board had 12 directors. 8 of them came from industry or banking. They were not neutral civil servants. They were the same people who received the loans. They sat in the room where the rules were made, and they voted to keep the rules exactly as they were. And the same window served another group, Junker landowners east of the Elbe, the old Prussian aristocratic families with thousands of hectares of grain fields, got the same deal, only secured against next year's harvest instead of factory goods. They borrowed marks, held them just long enough to buy more land from neighbors in trouble, then repaid when the marks were worthless. By October 1923, real wages for German workers had fallen to 28% of what they had been in 1913. The Reichsbank was financing purchases for people with something the bank would accept as a guarantee, and the paper money it printed to do so was eating through the savings of everyone else. The system was deliberate, and Hugo Stinnes was the man who understood it best. Hugo Stinnes, born 1870, a Ruhr coal family. By 1920, already the richest industrialist in Germany. What the hyperinflation gave him was not money. He had money. It was scale. Here is what he did, documented month by month in Feldman's biography. March 1921. Buys a coal mine in Essen. He paid with marks borrowed from the Reichsbank that same week. By the time the loan came due, those marks had lost 60% of their value. September 1921. Buys a shipping line in Hamburg. Same mechanism. 1921. Buys the Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung, one of the major newspapers in Berlin. Borrowed marks. Collapsing currency. permanent asset. Between 1921 and 1923, this pattern repeats dozens of times. Coal mines, steel mills, shipping lines, electric plants, newspapers. Every purchase paid for with money borrowed from the Reichsbank. Every loan paid back in paper worth less than the paper itself. His last words to his sons, written down by his biographer: "What is credit for me is debt for you." He understood the system exactly. The loans gave him real purchasing power, while the mark still had value. They gave him permanent factories and ships when the mark collapsed, and they would turn into crushing debt the moment the currency stopped falling. He knew it, and he bet that the day of stabilization would come after he had already finished buying. By November 1923, Hugo Stinnes controlled roughly 4,500 companies. 1 out of every 6 Germans who had a job worked for him. He did not hoard gold. He did not run to Switzerland. He used the Reichsbank's lending window exactly as it was built to be used. He died in April 1924, 8 months after the currency stabilized. His empire lasted 1 more year. Then the banks called in the real debts, and his sons discovered what he had warned them about. But Stinnes himself, in the window between 1921 and 1923, captured the value. The difference between Hugo Stinnes and Emma Schulte was not discipline, not intelligence, not timing. It was access. Let that sink in. Now here is the part most people who look at Weimar still haven't thought through. The Reichsbank could print marks. It could not print gold. It could not print Swiss francs. It could not print US dollars. That single limit split the German bond market in two. Between 1919 and 1921, when German companies wanted to borrow money, they had a choice. They could promise to pay back in marks, easy to sell, trusted by German families. Or they could promise to pay back in gold, same amount of gold, no matter what the paper mark did. Or they could promise to pay back in a foreign currency, dollars or francs delivered directly. Here is what happened to each group. IG Farben, the chemical giant, sold bonds in 1920 that promised to pay in gold. The total was 100 million in gold marks. When hyperinflation wiped out the paper mark, IG Farben paid these bonds in full between 1924 and 1925. The people who held them, mostly Swiss and Dutch banks, received exactly what they had been promised. German war bonds, the Kriegsanleihen, which ordinary families had bought during the Great War as an act of patriotism, told a different story. The total was 96 billion marks. By November 1923, the entire stock was worth 2 cents in gold. Not 2 cents per bond, 2 cents total. Corporate bonds. Stinnes and other industrialists sold in 1921 and 1922, the ones promising dollars or francs, paid out in full to foreign holders. Corporate bonds that promised marks paid out in nothing. The Reichsbank could not print foreign money. Bonds that promised gold or foreign money survived. Bonds that promised marks evaporated. The choice of what currency a bond promised was only available to big companies and wealthy buyers. That choice decided survival. Now here is something uncomfortable. Central banks have bought more than 3,200 tons of gold in the last 3 years. In 2022 alone, they've bought 1,136 tons, the highest since they started keeping records in the 1950s. China's central bank bought 225 tons that year. Turkey, Singapore, India, all moving in the same direction. Poland's central bank, in the country that lived through hyperinflation in 1923, is the most aggressive gold buyer in the world right now. It is aiming for 20% of its reserves in physical metal, in a vault, not on a screen. These are not the actions of banks that trust paper currency to hold its value long term. These are the actions of banks getting ready for something. U.S. federal debt passed $38 trillion in early 2026. The interest alone costs more than $1.2 trillion a year. More than Medicare, more than defense, and almost 3 times what it cost 5 years ago. The arithmetic is simple. Either the debt keeps being refinanced at rising interest rates, or the central bank prints money to buy the bonds itself. The second option has a name. We just watched what it does. These numbers are not arguments. They are the same table that existed in Germany in 1923, written in today's currency. The record from 1925 tells us exactly what banks do when the pressure reaches them. They choose their borrowers. They print for those borrowers. Savers pay the bill. The currency changes with the era. The mechanism does not. Think about that. The system in 1923 had a Reichsbank window, a group of industrialists with coal and steel and land, and a larger group, wage earners, pensioners, bondholders, with savings in paper marks. That is the shape. Rename the currency. Replace the central bank. The shape does not change. Emma Schulte sat in her daughter's two-room Neukölln flat in November 1923. She had done nothing wrong. The system had worked, exactly as built, for Hugo Stinnes. It had worked, exactly as built, for the Junker landowners east of the Elbe. It had worked, exactly as built, for the Swiss banks holding IG Farben gold bonds. It had not worked for her. The record shows no malfunction. It shows a choice. So far, we have seen who survived and how. Here is the protocol the record documents. First, borrow marks, buy factories. Hugo Stinnes. Industrialists with access to the Reichsbank window. 4,500 companies consolidated by November 1923, paid back in worthless paper, kept the factories. Second, earn foreign money. Junker landowners east of the Elbe. Grain sold to Switzerland and the Netherlands. Francs and guilders held outside German banks. Old mortgages paid off in worthless marks. 40% expansion of their estates for those who had the export route. Third, hold contracts written in something other than marks. Swiss banks, Dutch pension funds, bonds that promised gold or foreign currency. 60 to 70% of their original value recovered. For Germans who held bonds written in marks, 2.5 cents on the mark, often nothing. 3 paths, same entry ticket, something the Reichsbank would accept as a guarantee, an export business, or a piece of paper written in a currency the Reichsbank could not destroy. Emma Schulte had none of these. That was not a failure of her discipline. That was how the system was built. And the same system is run in Austria 1922, Hungary 1946, Argentina 2001. And it is running inside decisions being made right now. The Reichsbank said it was saving Germany's factories. The record shows it saved exactly what the people making the decisions already owned. Stinnes owned the factories. Emma worked in them. That is not saving. That is choosing. The real question is not whether it will happen again. The real question is whether you understand what it means to be on the wrong side of the choice before you need to know. Drop a wheelbarrow in the comments if you saw the transfer coming before the 2.5-cent verdict. Subscribe. Every week we take apart another mechanism the textbooks won't explain.